My father raised his champagne glass, looked me dead in the eye in front of 80 high society guests, and said, "Only the children who built something worthy of my name are truly part of this family. The rest of you are just guests." Everyone laughed, thinking it was a joke, but I knew better. I reached for my purse, tears burning in my eyes, ready to shrink back and take the humiliation like I always did. I was halfway out of my seat when my husband stood up beside me. He didn't raise his voice or make a scene. He just tapped his glass, pulled a sleek black leather folder from his suit jacket, and looked my father straight in the eyes. What he said next made my father's face drain completely white, turned his triumphant retirement gala into a public crime scene, and permanently stripped him of the empire he spent 30 years building. "My name is Clara, I'm 27 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I was the invisible thread keeping my family together, or at least that's what I tried to be." My father, Richard, was a ruthless corporate executive whose entire identity was tied to net worth, executive titles, and public status. In his eyes, success had a very specific look, and I was never it. While he idolized my older brother, Julian, for following in his footsteps into high-stakes finance, he viewed my choice to become a primary school teacher as a personal failure. To him, educating young children wasn't a noble calling, it was a lack of ambition. My husband, Mark, saw through the mind games from the very beginning. Mark was quiet, humble, and worked as a senior auditor, a man who spent his days analyzing the hidden details that everyone else overlooked. For 5 years of marriage, he watched silently as my father made passive-aggressive comments at holiday dinners, subtle digs about our modest home, and backhanded compliments about my income. Mark never lost his temper. He would simply take my hand under the table, squeeze it gently, and remind me that real value isn't measured by a bank account. What my father didn't realize was that Mark's quiet nature wasn't weakness, it was patience. He was observing, gathering every piece of the puzzle, waiting for the precise moment when my father's arrogance would finally cross the line. The grand ballroom of the Bellevue Hotel was bathed in warm golden light, filled with over 80 high society guests, board members, and prominent figures from the corporate world. It was my father's 30-year retirement gala, a night dedicated entirely to his vanity. Richard moved through the room like a king inspecting his domain, accepting praise and clinking glasses while making sure everyone noticed the absurdly expensive champagne being served. Mark and I sat at a table near the back, right next to the kitchen doors, a placement my father chose deliberately to remind us of our standing. Halfway through the dinner, Richard took the stage to give his grand speech. He began by lavishing praise on Julian, calling him the future of the family empire. With a flourish of theatrical pride, Richard presented Julian with the title deed to a multi-million-dollar luxury penthouse in downtown Chicago. The room erupted in applause, but Richard wasn't done. His eyes scanned the audience, locking directly onto me with a cold, mocking smirk. "Of course, true success requires discipline," Richard announced into the microphone, his voice echoing through the silent hall. "A family name is only as strong as the people carrying it." Unfortunately, not everyone in this bloodline understood what it takes to build a legacy. He paused, letting the heavy silence linger. "Only the children who built something worthy of my name are truly part of this family. The rest of you are just guests." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room, but most knew exactly who he was talking about. Then, he looked straight at me, pointed toward the exit, and said, "If you can't match the standard of this table, you can leave." I reached for my purse, my cheeks burning as the humiliation settled deep in my chest. I was ready to walk out quietly, just like I had done so many times before. But before I could even push my chair back, Mark's hand gently rested on my arm. He didn't look flustered, angry, or embarrassed. In fact, his face carried a calm, calculated focus I had never seen before. Slowly, Mark stood up. The quiet rustle of his jacket seemed to draw the attention of the entire ballroom. He didn't raise his voice. He simply picked up his butter knife, tapped his glass twice, and let the crisp metallic chime ring out across the silent venue. The guests turned around in confusion, expecting a quick apology or a graceful exit. Instead, Mark casually unbuttoned his suit jacket, reached into his inner pocket, and pulled out a sleek, black leather folder. "Richard," Mark said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the room without a single trace of hesitation. "Before Clara and I take our leave, there's a small matter of full disclosure that the board members in this room deserve to hear." My father's smug smile instantly faltered. "What is the meaning of this?" "Sit down, Mark. You're making a fool of yourself." "Am I?" Mark replied calmly, opening the folder. "Because according to these freshly audited internal records, this isn't a voluntary retirement dinner at all. 3 weeks ago, the board quietly requested your resignation after discovering a $4 million deficit in fund management under your direct supervision." Gasps erupted from the surrounding tables. Julian's face turned ghost white, and Richard slammed his hands onto the podium, his knuckles turning pale. "You have no authority to speak on company matters," Richard snarled, his voice cracking. "Actually, I do," Mark said smoothly, turning a page. "The independent forensic auditing firm hired by the board to review your books was mine. And the silent investment group that just bought out your distressed shares to save this company from public bankruptcy yesterday? That happens to be my family's venture. In fact, Richard, you don't own this company anymore." "I do." The entire ballroom froze, the silence so absolute you could hear the hum of the air conditioners. Mark stepped forward, turning the open folder toward the front tables where the company's primary shareholders sat. With complete composure, he began reading key excerpts from the audited balance sheets, highlighting the exact dates, forged authorization codes, and shell accounts Richard had used to cover up his mounting personal losses. "The luxury penthouse you just gifted to Julian?" Mark continued, looking directly at my brother, whose hands were shaking violently. "That title deed was purchased using company credit lines that were defaulted on last Tuesday. Since those assets were seized during yesterday's buyout, the property actually belongs to the firm. Julian, I suggest you hand the keys back before security steps in." The high society guests who had been hanging on to my father's every word moments ago began whispering among themselves, casting disgusted glances at the head table. The very board members who had raised their glasses to Richard's 30-year legacy were now leaning away from him, frantically whispering to their legal counsel. My father stood frozen at the podium, the color completely drained from his face. His mouth opened to speak, to yell, to issue another arrogant demand, but no sound came out. The powerful, invincible facade he had spent 30 years building shattered into pieces right in front of the 80 people whose opinions meant the world to him. For the first time in his life, my father looked small, exposed, and completely powerless. Mark closed the black folder, placed it neatly on our table, and offered me his hand. I stood up slowly, looking my father in the eye one last time. There was no anger left in me, only a deep, quiet sense of freedom. As we walked toward the exit, the room remained dead silent, every eye following us until the heavy double doors clicked shut behind us. Within a month, the full story broke internally. Richard was forced into complete retirement with no pension, no executive perks, and a ruined reputation. Julian had to vacate the penthouse immediately and take an entry-level job to pay off his personal debts. Meanwhile, Mark and I continued living our quiet life, using our resources to support local schools and community projects, completely cutting ties with the toxic family dynamics that had held me back for so long. Standing up to my father didn't just expose his arrogance, it gave me back my voice. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Have you ever had to stand up to a toxic family member who crossed the line or seen someone get what they truly deserved? Drop a comment below and let me know the city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far our story has reached. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell for more stories like this. See you in the next video.